Yes. I just want you to know, after I have one small cup in the morning, I brush my teeth and I never drink coffee again for the remaining day.
Really?
I had a coffee. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's true.
I didn't know you drank coffee, Rich.
Yeah, very little. Very little. Okay, so residential purchase agreement. It consists of, for those that haven't been here before, a number of different documents, not just a residential purchase agreement. So the very first form in the packet is called the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship required by law. That defines what your duty is to your client, your fiduciary duty. So it's already happening. Still making the next podcast.
What's that?
We did not put this form in there.
Okay.
I'm sorry. What we printed out was just the residential purchase agreement, so I'm gonna just quickly scan over these other disclosures quickly. Because when you're having these documents signed electronically, you have no choice but to have them signed. That's just a brief explanation. And then the second page of it, this is something I always talk about. You see this block, it says seller's brokerage firm, do not complete. This is a sample only, page 2 of the agency disclosure relationship. So it just gives you an idea about what is on page 1 of the residential purchase agreement, which we're going to be seeing next. So there's nothing to be signed on page 2 or initial, as a matter of fact. Okay, California residential purchase agreement and joint escrow instructions. Start with the date prepared. Now I've got March 31st, 2026. This is very, very important. Ideally, you'll just put in the date or the date that you're drafting the document. Why is this important? Because anytime you issue an addendum or any other document that's referencing the residential purchase agreement, it's going to ask you for the reference date. It is not the date of execution of the contract. It will reference this date. That contract could be executed April 7th. So when we reference an addendum back to the purchase contract, we would use the reference date of March 31st, not the date of execution, which would be April 7th. Is that clear, everybody? Okay, great. This is an offer from Jesse Waters. Anybody watch Fox News? That's some political humor. And the property address, that's my former home address itself. The APN number is not correct. So one simple thing, if you're actually going to be writing a purchase contract, you can use something called MLS Connect, which we're not going into today. And if you use MLS Connect, you can import all the information that the listing agent imported. So it will import the address, the APN number, it will import the license information for the listing office too. So you're more likely to have a more complete and accurate package if you do that. Plus, you save yourself some time that typing your own information. So section 2B, confirmation of agency, and this is required. This is going to define who is representing who. Now you can see section B, confirmation, seller's brokerage firm, Coldwell Banker Platinum Properties. The license number for the brokerage is to the right. And Carlos happens to be the agent working for Coldwell Banker. And he is representing the seller. Now his license number is there. And then you can see the buyer's brokerage firm. In this example, it's Coldwell Banker Platinum Properties, and Richard Moore is representing the buyer. Now, if the agents are affiliated with the same broker's license, it is considered to be dual agency. And that's why the boxes for both the seller's brokerage firm and buyer's brokerage firm are checked, stating both the buyer and seller. If Richard Moore was with a different broker license, then we would just check the boxes accordingly. Carlos would be representing the seller. There we go. And then Richard Moore would be representing the buyer. But in this case, it is dual agency. And there are signature pages contained within the residential purchase agreement, which you do sign even though you're not a party to the contract. And that completes confirmation of agency, and that is required by California law, as a matter of fact. And if for some reason it's not completed in its entirety, then you have to use a separate form called confirmation of agency to complete the confirmation of agency. So don't ignore it when you, if you're a listing agent and you receive an incomplete purchase contract, make sure it's completed. Save yourself some time. Okay, any questions about that? And it's pretty simple. And then section D, potentially competing buyers and sellers. One of the documents that's already attached to the RPA is the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. And you're obtaining the consent of the buyer or seller indicating, hey, I might be representing 5 other sellers with the same identical property as you. Or Mr. Buyer, I could be representing other buyers who are also interested in buying the same property. So it puts them on notice. And then let's get to the purchase agreement itself. And if you notice in the gray block, it says para with a pound sign, paragraph title or contract term, terms and conditions, and additional terms. Under, to the very left, section 3A, B, C, it's just it's defining that block within the purchase contract. But the paragraph number, it's applicable if you don't understand exactly the terminology associated with the third column entitled paragraph title of contract. It refers you to the underlying paragraph so you can see the context of what exactly that information means. So refer to that periodically. And I know the contract relatively well, so I'm not going to go back and forth. I'll just go through what the important details are associated with each line item. So section 3A, you can see it's referring to paragraph 5 and 5B, and it says cash, the purchase price. We have $1 million purchase price. If we do check the box for all cash, it will then eliminate, without you stating it, the loan contingency. So it's an all cash offer. There is no loan contingency, and section 5 references that fact. So keep that in mind. Cash is considered a form of financing, as a matter of fact. But in this case, we're going to say it is not an all cash offer. Section 3B, close of escrow. Commonly, you'll say so many days after acceptance. Can anybody here define acceptance for me? Well, I'll save you some time. Acceptance is not the date of the last signature. So a buyer submits his purchase contract. It goes to the seller signs it. And whatever date that is, that's great. But we don't have an accepted contract until the seller delivers the contract back to the buyer. So it's the date of delivery. So that's important for escrow because obviously their time frame for the close of escrow is predicated upon the date of acceptance, not the date of the last signature. So we start counting days for the close of escrow. We start counting days for contingencies. That's very, very important to know that. And maybe a seller receives the contract, they signed it, but for some reason didn't return it that day. So you can see how that theoretically could affect all of the time frames within the contract. Section 3B, you can also put a specified date. I would probably recommend not doing that because things happen in the meantime, and you may not have sufficient time to close within that time frame. Section A, the 3C rather, expiration of offer, 3 calendar days after all buyer signatures. That's the default. So if the buyer signed the contract yesterday and they delivered to the seller today, that's day 1. So there's only 2 more days remaining before the offer expires. So it doesn't count. You don't start counting the day it's signed. You do counting from the day it's signed, but you can lose time if you don't deliver it on the same day. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Section D1, initial deposit amount. In our example, we have $30,000, and that's 3% of the purchase price. And now if we look at the language in parentheses, it says percentage number above is for calculation purposes only, and it is not a contractual term. So what does that mean? I put in $30,000. I can change that to $20,000. And it's a calculation, nothing more than that. So keep in mind, there are certain things in the purchase contract that will adjust automatically. So if I increase my purchase price to 2 million and I said I'm putting 20% down, that means now I have to put $400,000 down instead of 200,000 based on a $1 million purchase. However, if the purchase price is negotiated up from $1 million to $1.5 million, the $20,000 or $30,000 deposit remains as presented in the purchase contract. So it does not adjust, if that makes sense.
Rich, is there a recommended initial deposit?
Well, sure. I say depending on the marketplace, how aggressive sellers are. If it's a seller's market, then 3%. But if it's a buyer's market, I think you can actually offer something less than 3%. Now, keep in mind the amount of money that you're putting down as the initial deposit could be impacted because of a breach of contract. So in the event the buyer breaches the contract, they're subject to losing their deposit, but no more than 3% of the purchase price. But that's predicated upon the fact that it is going to be a primary owner-occupied residence. If you're making an offer on a property that is going to be an investment property, the liquidated damages clause is not limited to 3%. So if you get aggressive on an investment property, you put 10% in there and use the buyer default, you possibly could lose the entire 10% earnest money deposit. If I'm a buyer and I put 10% down and the intent was that I was going to occupy that property as my primary residence, my exposure is 3%. Investment property, whatever you put in there, that's your total exposure.
So this is what we call the earnest money deposit.
Yes, you'll hear escrow say EMD, for example. Earnest money deposit, initial deposit. And then to right of that, and this is something very important, when do we have to deposit the money? Well, the default is within 3 business days after acceptance, and it must be sent by wire transfer. That is the default response. You can change that. So if it's business days, let's assume acceptance, that means the contract was delivered to the party, not by the party who last signed to the other party. If it was, I received delivery on Thursday, let's count 3 business days, Friday, Monday, Tuesday. The buyer has until Tuesday, that's a whole 5 days, to deliver their earnest money deposit. We don't want that. I would say if we're a seller, we certainly don't want that. And if I'm representing my buyer, I want them to be committed to this transaction. So let's accelerate the time frame in which they need to make their initial deposit. That would be my approach. I'm here to protect my buyer. However, people get cold feet, they back out, they do all these other things and are wasting your time. Are they going to be serious or not? And then the default is, once again, by wire transfer. And people might say, oh, well, I can bring a cashier's check. Well, all banks now are going to put at least a 7-day hold on a cashier's check. It's not going to be cashed by the bank in which we deposited the cashier's check. And certainly no such thing as a personal check. Only a cashier's check and wire transfer are considered to be good funds. An ACH transfer like Zelle, that is not considered to be good funds. Our escrow is set up that it will reject monies that are sent via ACH transfer or Zelle. Because theoretically, within a week, the sender can rescind that money. Whereas a wire transfer, once it's sent, there is no rescission. And then, does that make sense? Right. So reduce the number of business days. This is the only aspect of the contract that is predicated upon business days. Otherwise, everything else counts when you're counting days in regards to contingencies, close of escrow, so on and so forth. So it's a dramatic departure from everything else.
Everything else is just days, and that part only is business days.
Correct.
Because it has to.
Yeah,
And
that's just interesting though.
keep in mind that acceptance date is day 0.
Yes.
Okay. So it's days.
Yeah, so acceptance, I received the contract back today is day zero, tomorrow will be day one, and that's how we would count. We would count that for the close of escrow in the same manner, and we would count that for contingencies also. Loan amount, well, we decided we're gonna put 20% down, so that means an $800,000 loan at a purchase price of $1 million. And if we look to the right, the default type of financing is conventional. Now, below the $800,000, it talks about a fixed rate or an initial adjustable rate. You heard Gina talking about an adjustable rate loan. If it is, then we would check that box. But in our case, for the most part, we see mostly people pursuing traditional conventional financing, meaning amortized fully for 30 years. But now I think we're going to see more and more adjustables, meaning it's fixed for 5, 7, or 10 years and adjusts after that. So the next line below is the fixed rate or initial adjustable rate. And then not to exceed, I put in 6.5%. When you insert a percentage, you're creating a contingency for the buyer. Rates have gone up lately. So possibly they qualified at 6%. And we want to give some kind of cushion, as a matter of fact, so because we don't want the listing agent to come back and counter it. But let's assume we really want a rate of 6%, but we can qualify up to 6.5%. So put the maximum cap that a buyer can qualify at. If it goes above 6.5% and the buyer still qualifies, the buyer does not have to proceed with the transaction. This creates a contingency and it's a protection clause for the buyer.
So like, let's say in the morning, the lender says, they're gonna, they quoted them a rate of 6.25%. Basically in the morning that we're writing the RPA. Today's rate basically is 6.25. Buyer feels good about 6.25 if they can get 6.25. Would you put like 6.5% above?
I would.
At 0 points?
Yes.
So this one is only applied for the initial adjustable rate, right? Not the fixed rate.
And for both.
Oh, both of them.
For both.
Right?
For both.
And then I had a quick question about, let's say we mark that it's gonna be a fixed rate, but later on in escrow it changes to adjustable.
Well, you can do that. However, if you are not successful in obtaining the adjustable rate loan, then you cannot use the loan contingency to terminate the contract.
It would have to be what is written on the RPA, which is written as a fixed rate.
Correct. So your buyers can, and we see it often, they state they're going to pursue the type of financing that's in the contract. They choose to pursue alternative financing. However, if they're not successful obtaining that alternative financing, they cannot use the loan contingency as a reason to cancel without being in breach of contract. So when you're speaking to your buyers, hey, great, if you want to make an adjustment, you want to do something else, but keep in mind, if you fail to close, you could be putting your earnest money deposit at risk. Because the seller is relying on the type of financing that you have.
So we should always just write what the buyer's intention, their original intention is.
Yes.
You always write their original
Yes.
intention.
So if they decide they want to pursue alternative financing, my recommendation is that they continue pursuing the original loan that's shown in the purchase contract.
And I'm sorry, the rate that's listed here, you give a little buffer room for whatever reason, but that is a conversation that I, as the buyer's agent, has to talk with the mortgage lender or with the
Well,
buyer.
I'd say you would speak with your buyer and make sure, confirm with the lender that they will qualify at that.
So I'm talking with the buyer, ask them what their rate they're going to be qualified for, and then I call the lender too.
You can.
Okay.
Right. We want to make sure that there's some kind of buffer in there. Otherwise, the listing agent is going to come back. Because if I put 6% in there, 6% is not available today. Already, it gives me the ability to cancel the contract as the buyer. And if I'm a listing agent, I'm going to say, come on, you're not even serious. I have to counter this out.
Okay.
Yes.
What if we don't put the percentage here, interest?
If you don't, then because I have such excellent credit and I qualify at 12%, and if I can get a loan at 12%, then I can't cancel based upon the loan contingency. So even, I don't want to go up to 6.5%. But I can actually qualify for a loan up to 12% if I don't put a cap in there. And I can qualify for a 12% loan, those are today's market rates. I cannot cancel based upon a loan contingency if I'm approved that, not that.
Isn't there a loan contingency in the next page that we can use?
No, no, there's just the detail of it.
So Young, you're trying to give your buyer a way out.
Yes,
So another way out of the contract.
we want
If you
the
want to
flexibility, as Anthony said, you know, if it goes up a little bit, wonderful. But if we don't put anything in there, it very well, it doesn't cap the interest rate, and if your buyer qualifies, you can't cancel based on the loan contingent. Or the interest rate.
So really, that's for interest rate. And then if you go to the next page, like Sheryl's talking about, he's talking about L1AA. That's really more about like, can you get a loan? So that's more like,
To
you
not
lost your job, I think, right? Like in the midst of,
Yeah, but it's two parts, right? We're gonna cap it at the interest rate. And it's just still one loan contingency. I guess, no, you're right. So we're talking about an interest rate contingency, assuming we put an interest rate in, but there's also the loan contingency. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. So let's say we wrote this out just like this, but then tomorrow, let's say interest rates spike and he can't get anything less than like 7%.
Mhm.
Who can cancel the contract now?
The buyer.
The buyer can, oh, because the buyer is saying, I can't qualify for something that's here, so I'm gonna back out. Okay, okay.
Even if I qualify, but I don't want to any longer because the interest rate's just too high.
Right.
You know, affordability.
so one question I have about this is when we write it this way.
Mhm.
And can we cancel on the percent of the loan?
I
That's
mean,
on
the
the
loan of
RPA.
value or.
The 6.5%, like if I get,
Uh-huh.
in Anthony's example, it goes to 7%.
Mhm.
Do I still have to cancel within whatever my dictated loan contingency on page 2?
Yes,
Still has to do that,
yeah, that time frame.
no matter.
Well, you never have to cancel until the seller sends a notice to perform.
Right.
You can just let it
Go.
continue on. Exactly. Exactly. And then in terms of the second bullet point, buyer to pay up to 0 points, put 0 in there. Otherwise, possibly, I can pay, if I can pay 10 points to get an interest rate, then I may be forced to perform. So we make it very simple.
So does that mean if you leave that blank, then it can come back and bite
Yeah,
you?
that's exactly how it could be interpreted.
Okay.
Or put 1 point in there.
Just put 0 points.
Yeah, that's the easiest thing to do.
Alright.
See a lot of people leaving it blank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it only takes one time.
Mhm.
And then to the right, the default is conventional, or if checked, FHA, VA, seller financing. Now, FHA, what comes with FHA, if I check that box, it's going to then include the FEAC amendatory clause. And then the HID is just recommendation that the buyer protect themselves by getting an inspection. But an amendatory clause from an FHA loan is required. And what it does, it protects the buyer, because if in the event the appraised value doesn't come in at the purchase price, the buyer can cancel. Even in the event the buyer releases their appraisal contingency, if the appraised value doesn't come in at the purchase price or greater, the buyer can still cancel. Typically, you release the appraisal contingency, and then the appraised value comes in lower, you can't cancel. However, an FHA loan or a VA loan, that's not true because of the amendatory clause. In the event we have a purchase price of $1 million and we negotiate and we had the amendatory clause at $1 million, and for some reason the purchase price goes up, you want to negotiate it up, then you have to revise the amendatory clause to whatever the actual purchase price is.
Or if it doesn't appraise, you can try to renegotiate the price down.
You can, there's no mishaps, but you have the ability to cancel. But the problem is with an FH loan, and I really haven't seen this happen, but let's assume the buyer and seller enter into a contract, it's FHA financing, and it's $1 million purchase price, and then the appraisal comes in lower. And the buyer thinks, well, you know what? I'm not ready to cancel. I'm just gonna hang on to this transaction and see what happens. They can hold this transaction up to the date of close of escrow and then cancel. Because they can cancel based upon the mandatory clause.
The buyer can do that
Yeah.
past all the contingency dates and
Yeah.
everything regardless.
Yeah.
Even if they lift their contingency.
Even if they remove the appraisal contingency and the appraised value was less than the purchase price. Less than when the purchase price has to equal the dollar amount we place on the mandatory clause.
And that's for FHA and VA.
Yes.
Pretty much gives them leverage over the.
A lot of leverage.
So if you're close to closing and you're threatening them, that
Yeah,
you're
just
gonna
don't,
cancel.
I think I'm gonna close, I think I'm
Just
gonna close,
renegotiate the
right?
price.
Yeah, and there's virtually nothing a seller can do. They're locked up. Actually, anytime you're in a purchase contract, once there's a fully executed contract, the buyer has control over the property, so keep that in mind.
So in that case, someone does not like it, FHA is very wrong.
You know, we just don't see many around here. It's, farther east, it tends to be much more prominent. I would say, depending upon the marketplace, if that's the only offer I'm getting, then certainly I'm gonna take the opportunity to pursue that transaction.
Depends on how competitive.
Yeah.
I had an FHA buyer and it closed perfectly well and normal like anybody else's escrow. But it's because we didn't go up against another offer. I think there was somebody with 20%. They just had my offer at 5%, so they worked with us.
And I do think somebody, because FHA requires 3% down, they're probably just as happy as can be to be going forward. They can get, they're qualified. And then, let's see, section E2, additional finance amount. Right, I'm just going to disregard that. If you reach a certain milestone and you and the seller agree to deposit additional money, you can actually put that in there. Then occupancy type, this is always very, very important. The default is primary. However, if checked secondary investment, I did check investment just for a specific reason, but the default is primary once again. However, when you're evaluating the pre-approval letter from your lender to represent the buyer, make sure it's for their primary residence. If you're buying an investment property, make sure it's for an investment property. There's a difference. We're just going to move back.
What if the buyer says they initially, oh, it will be primary, but change the mind, they close, oh, I'll do the investments.
So are you telling me they're not gonna move into the property?
Yeah.
And they pursued a loan for a primary residence?
No, they initially want to buy primary,
Uh-huh.
but during the closing period, they changed, oh, I'm not doing the investment.
Well, you should modify the contract.
It's contract,
And then more importantly, you need to notify the lender.
okay.
Otherwise, if you pursue, you're not going to occupy the property.
Mhm.
And you get a loan for a primary residence, that's loan fraud.
Ah,
So a politician is getting investigated for that right now.
Yes. So we don't want to do that. Lenders have the ability to do home inspections after you move it. And why would they even question a loan? Well, let's see, I live in a home that's 3,000 square feet. I'm buying another home that is 2,000 square feet and it's a mile away. And I'm claiming I'm gonna move into that property. Underwriters start to question that. What is the motivation for you to step down from that house? You're gonna convert that larger home to a rental property. They start questioning that. So we don't even want to get into that kind of discussion. Or if it's 1,000 square foot condo you're buying and saying, I'm gonna move into that. Well, maybe if you have a financial hardship, you can demonstrate something like that, but they are certainly gonna question the viability of what you're doing. And then section G1 is seller credit to buyer, and this is nothing uncommon. We've submitted an offer to the seller, but we want the seller to pay closing costs, some other things, so we can put any dollar amount in there we want. So we need to do that. If we're requesting a credit from the seller, we need to know that if there's a loan, we need to notify the lender, because the lender has to approve that. Based upon the loan to value, there could be a cap in regards to the total credits that the buyer can use when pursuing a loan. So if the loan to value is 50%, then the lender is going to allow a greater credit. If I'm only putting 10% down, they're going to limit the amount of credit that I can actually obtain.
Who is determining this number? I mean, after negotiation, as a seller, am I checking with the lender, or is it something the buyer has to check?
It's the buyer that's going to do it.
A lot of different buyers.
So if you're representing the buyer, and the buyer needs a credit to cover all of their closing costs, and you successfully negotiate 50,000 with the seller, okay, you may cover
And it's not as common right now, though, that buyers are asking for a credit,
it. It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be.
because you're going up against offers that aren't asking for credit, so that can make your offer look weaker if you're
Okay.
asking for money.
But, I still see it on contracts. I just put an exorbitant amount in there just to make sure it stood out.
It's a high.
And there's another reason I put an exorbitant. I'm gonna skip down to that right now. So let's assume that I negotiate a $50,000 credit from the seller. And then my closing costs in total are only $30,000. Well, the contract stipulates that any unused credit will be lost. So to prevent that, we need to state something in the contract indicating that any unused or unapplied credit will be used as a direct reduction of the purchase price. So difference in my example is $20,000, right? So we look at section R. Buyer and seller agree that any unapplied or remaining buyer credit shall be applied as a direct reduction in the purchase price.
That's pretty sneaky and smart.
For the buyer.
Yeah,
Yes.
for you as the agent representing your buyer, they love you for that.
Otherwise, the seller has no obligation to negotiate with you in regards to that $20,000. And just think, if your buyer removed their contingencies, can't back out, even though as angry as they are, they could possibly lose their deposit.
So, how would that work? The credit would just apply, and this just have an escrow where they would apply that credit to the purchase price? And you don't need to.
We'd be amending the purchase price.
So you gotta go back and amend this and do this over again?
Yes.
Okay.
It would just be a simple amendment itself saying the purchase price shall be.
Oh, okay, like a addendum.
Yeah, exactly. And it will go back to the lender.
That's another thing. Amendments are changes to contracts. Addendums are additions, pretty much additional statement to contracts.
And then some other language I put in here, just because this happens, and this is not necessarily applicable to this contract that I drafted, but the next sentence I wrote in section R is selling agent, that's person representing buyer, is related to buyer and holds a direct beneficial interest in buyer's acquisition of property. So if you're an agent, you're representing a buyer and you have an interest in this property, you need to specify that. We need to disclose that. And then the next sentence I put in there, and this happens, selling agent is related to buyer. So maybe you're just related to your mom and dad who you're representing. You need to notify the parties that there is a relationship there. Or what if the buyer, you're a buyer and you're a licensee, you also need to notify the seller that you are a licensed real estate agent.
Even if you have an agent representing you?
Yes, even if you have a very good question. If you have an agent representing you, if you are the buyer and you're licensed, you need to notify them. Because it's perceived as you having an undue advantage over the other party, being a licensee. Just on that. And then section 3G2, additional seller credit terms. If you want to ask for another credit, you can put it in there or something else. I haven't witnessed anybody using that yet at this point in time, so in favor, who knows? Section 3G3, seller payment to compensate buyer's broker, and this is very, very critical when you're representing the buyer. You want to get paid. And to the right, seller agrees to pay buyer's broker out of transaction proceeds 3% of the final purchase price, and if applicable, you can put in a fixed amount. Or you can just put in a fixed amount. So remember, for you to be compensated when representing a buyer, you must have a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. For you to show a property, you must have a buyer representation broker compensation agreement. So you must have a contractual relationship to show property or to be entitled to any type of compensation. Now, on the purchase, let's assume we have that buyer representation agreement signed. The buyer agreed to pay us 3%. So here we are now. The buyer is actually negotiating to have the seller pay the commissions that they owe their agent, and that's what's taking place. And in no case, when you're an agent representing a buyer, can you ever receive more than what is shown in that buyer representation agreement. So you can never, if your representation agreement says 2% and you put 3% in here, you're only entitled to receive 2% and nothing more. It doesn't matter the various sources of those monies. So what's going to happen? The listing agent has no right to see your representation agreement. That changed a while back. Before, they used to request a copy of that. But escrow is going to ask for a copy of that representation agreement, and they're going to assure everyone that you as the buyer's agent will not receive anything in excess of what's shown on a representation agreement. My example, 2%. Now, what if it's the opposite way? The seller comes back and says, I'm only going to pay 1%, and the buyer agreed to pay you 2%. Well, assuming you don't relinquish on that, then the buyer's going to have to pay you that additional 1%.
They have to. There's no, is that like something where they can back out of, or?
No,
No.
you can, if you're generous, allow them to pay less. And however, you're not entitled to structure the buyer representation agreement by saying, if the seller is only going to pay me 1, then I'll agree to reduce my commission to 1. Doing something like that renders that representation agreement unenforceable. You can have verbal discussions. They have to trust you. Any questions about that? All right, section 3H1, verification of all cash, sufficient funds. Now, the default for H1, H2, and H3 is that you've attached these documents. So, verification of all funds, sufficient funds, attached to the offer. Not 3 days later, if I check this box, that means 3 days after acceptance, I'm going to provide you with evidence that I had the cash. So don't check the box. Verification of down payment and closing costs, don't check the box. You should be submitting some form of evidence, bank statements, investment account statements that demonstrate that the buyer has sufficient funds. And keep in mind, the cash or the money for the down payment and closing costs, that is a contractual covenant. It is not a contingency. So if I claim I'm putting $200,000 down and I don't have $200,000 and I qualify for the loan, but I don't have $200,000, I'm going to be in breach of contract. And you as the listing agent, you should be reviewing the documentation. In addition to that, when you're looking at the documentation that a buyer's giving you, compare the names on the purchase contract to the names on the bank statements. If they're not the same people, then they likely don't have control over those funds. So what good is it? If the money's not patriated in this country, personally, I would tell my seller, that's not sufficient, and we need to get something else to verify the buyer has sufficient funds. It's very difficult to bring money into this country if it's not patriated here. And that.
Big document is like when usually we get the PDF file from bank statement links.
Mhm.
Is there any way we can actually find the like 100%?
Verify that?
Yeah, verify your choice because you said check the name and things, right?
Yes, yeah.
But
Someone could alter the statements.
yeah, but how can we trust it?
How can you trust the documents?
Yeah,
Well, here's what the contract does do in favor of the seller. If the seller makes a determination that the evidence of funds is not sufficient for them, then they can actually say, as long as they do it consistently with everybody, so we don't want to discriminate against anyone, say, I need to speak to the bank.
mm,
You can do something like that. Now you're probably gonna push the buyer fine. And if there's a lender involved, ideally the lender is not in collusion with the buyer, trying to say, oh no, they don't have the money. I don't think I've had one example where that has happened actually. What we do see when there are investors making offers on property, they'll give a bank statement and they'll show that they have X amount of dollars in the bank. But we don't know how many offers they're placing out there. So they may be placing offers on properties totaling $5 million and they have $1 million in the bank.
I think if you saw it, you would know. Because like I did receive, when I was on the listing side, what I believe to be fraudulent bank statements. I had 7 offers, and 1 offer came in from investors. And I don't know why they sent it like this, but it was a screenshot, not the actual bank statements, and the editing tools were in the screenshot. Editing tools, editing the dollar amounts are in the screen, you know what I'm talking about? I was like, wow, I've never seen something like this before. So sometimes, or you'll see like the lines don't mix, they don't match up, or the font is different.
Yeah.
So the font is different, that's the biggest like telltale sign. So you'll probably know.
Yeah, I would accept a screenshot. I want a statement. I want all pages to the statements too.
Yeah.
That's what a lender is going to want. So ask them for that. And when an offer is submitted, if you're not getting what you believe to be necessary documentation that's going to allow you to make a decision, don't accept their offer. Don't put yourself in a position of allowing a seller to accept an offer in which we haven't verified funds. Because they're going to come back to us and say, well, you should have known. So don't make offers or accept offers in which the buyer's going to come in with their documents 3 days later after acceptance. Now you have to go through the whole cancellation aspect, and people sometimes contest that. Section H3, verification of loan application. There should always be the pre-approval letter attached, right? And there is always a difference, pre-qualification or pre-approval. What's the difference? Pre-qualification indicates that they have received documentation from the buyer. I gave my bank statements. I gave my tax returns or my pay stubs. A pre-approval, pre-qual is not including that. Pre-approval, the buyer or borrower is actually giving substantiating documentation. So there's a difference. Pre-qual, it's just based upon my verbal representation. I earn $1 million a year and I have no debt.
so in the listing, in the MLS, most listing agents kind of commented that when you kind of send me the offer, like RPA and all the bank statement or proof of funds and things, then I need to check the pre-approval. Right?
If you have a pre-approval,
Oh, pre-approval here is from the loan.
the lender.
Lender, okay,
lender.
lender, okay.
But it depends if you have the pre-approval, it's a better presentation. If you only have the pre-qual, it's not as reliable because the buyer hasn't actually given supporting documentation.
Okay.
So when you read the letter, you can differentiate between that. And then section J, final verification of condition. It says 5 days prior to the close of escrow. So the contract gives the buyer the opportunity to go into the property 5 days before. It can be modified. It's not a big deal. And they're there to do one thing, to confirm the property is in the same condition as of the date of acceptance. What is the date of acceptance? It's the date the contract was delivered to the person who last signed the contract. And the other purpose is, if there are agreed upon repairs, to verify that those repairs are complete. You're not there to find other conditions now that the buyer may want to repair or make another request. So it's limited. That's really what we're supposed to do. Make sure the property is in the same condition, that the pool's clean, if it was clean at the day of acceptance.
Can I ask a quick question about
Sure.
that one? On final verification condition, like let's say, we asked them for HVAC to be serviced because it wasn't cool or whatever,
Mhm.
not free on, and then the other one was there's a gas leak and we need that handled before the close of escrow. So we'll ask for receipts to show that the work was done.
Required to do the receipts.
So we asked for the receipts for
Mhm.
the work has been done, but then my next question was like, how do we just double check ourselves, or would it be prudent with a gas leak situation to hire someone to come in the last 5 days?
I don't think it's necessary
I
to
think
do
that's
it.
right.
Yeah.
Turn on, everything.
Hey, if they've given you evidence in terms of someone that's licensed, I think that's
That's good.
sufficient.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes people hire their inspectors to come in again, make sure it's done.
Yeah, just maybe the comfort level of the buyer,
Yeah,
but it's not necessary.
it is not necessary, correct. So then assignment request, what does that mean? Well, I'm an investor and I try to get properties tied up and I try to sell my interest in that purchase contract to somebody else. Well, this is one way for me making money. Now, the seller has to agree to such an assignment. However, if it's me as an individual and I'm assigning it to my own family trust, permission is not required from the seller. But if I'm going to assign my interest to a third party, it requires seller's consent. And in either case, there's something called an assignment of agreement addendum, which we're going to be having the seller sign together with us. And on that form, it asks if I'm, as the assignor, if I'm earning any money for the assignment, because maybe there's value in there. So we have to disclose that to the seller. I bought the property, at least I'm under contract. I'm going to assign my interest to Carlos. He's willing to pay me $50,000 for my interest in that property. That's going to be disclosed to the seller.
So is this pretty much just changing who the buyer's gonna be?
Yes, it is, but it does not in any way absolve the buyer of their original obligations. But keep in mind, if an assignment takes place, whomever the assignee is, the person receiving the assignment, they have an obligation to provide evidence of funds, dancing, so on and so forth. A seller cannot unreasonably withhold approval on an assignment.
So does this usually happen on like wholesaling deals? When you assign it, when does this happen?
I'd say more often with a person who's assigning it to their own entity. So if they're assigning it to their own LLC, in which the proportionate interest is the same, or they're assigning it to their family trust, that's typically where we see most assignments.
Or if they're adding a family member. or
Or
spouse.
removing a family
Or,
member.
yeah,
And that happens quite often, as a matter of fact, where somebody is added or somebody is removed to the purchase agreement.
yeah, they might have submitted the offer on their own and then like during the transaction decided, hey, you know what, let's both, be the buyers on it. So then you do an assignment, add the person, and then the seller has to agree to it.
Yeah, but, whoever the assignee is, they have to provide documentation, just saying, I add somebody whose credit score is 400. Maybe that causes the loan to fail.
But that could technically happen
It could.
at any time of an escrow.
Well,
Past
the contract limits it to 17 days.
But technically, if the seller accepts it later on, it can be done.
Yeah. There's nothing
Right,
that, if the seller wants to close the transaction.
like you escrow closes, right, quickly, and then they say, I want to add my son to the.
Well,
that-
No, we're talking about before escrow closes.
Whole time we thought it was gonna be in the buyer's name for X reason, the wife's name.
Okay,
48 hours before we closed, all of a sudden the husband's name came on and we did an assignment, some sweet addendum.
Yeah.
And the
Okay.
seller agreed.
okay.
Closed.
Yeah, it's probably just a wise thing to do, even though the seller had no obligation, it would have probably passed the 17-day time.
Everything was already passed already,
Yeah.
they're just like, let's close.
So now you're just scrambling to get everything back.
Just scrambling.
It requires, and if it's an assignment to other parties, then theoretically, you need to have the assignee initial the front page of every single disclosure. So now, it's an exercise in futility here. But if I'm assigning it to my own family trust, it's not necessary that I initial the first page of each and every disclosure that was provided by the seller. But we see more and more assignments, and we see more and more purchase transactions in which there are entities buying. Make it simple. And so let's see, assignment requests. And then.
Fun part.
So, yeah, loans. All right. This is what Cheryl was talking about. So loan contingency. You get, if you're submitting an offer, you check no loan contingency. If you're submitting an all cash offer, you don't need to check no loan contingency. It's already presumed in the body of the contract. So when can somebody cancel based upon the loan contingency? Well, assume they pursue a loan for $800,000 and they're putting $200,000 down. If they're denied, right, then they can cancel based upon the loan contingency. What if they refuse to cooperate with the lender? Well, the declination letter coming from the lender is going to indicate that. So a seller is going to contest that. So if the buyer thinks he's so clever and says, I'm not going to give the most recent pay stubs or bank statements, and that's going to cause my loan to fail. Well, that's going to fail. However, the declination letter is going to indicate that. So we don't want to get into that. And then appraisal.
I have a quick question on the loan. So if I put the percent on the first page, right, like 6.5, I can't put no loan contingency here.
You can.
I can?
You can.
But then I would have loan contingency, right? Or
No, you would just, the only contingency you would have is based upon the interest rate itself. You're saying I qualify for the loan.
oh,
You can still cancel. If
mhm.
you mark no loan contingency, just because you want to get your offer accepted and write like a cash offer. But then you.
If the rate's higher.
If
than
the rate's
6.5.
higher, so but then you still write 6.5% or whatever, you can technically still cancel off the rate. If it goes to 7%.
If that's all that's available, right?
Okay.
That's clever.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is. It is. So the loan contingency is pretty simple, right? From one perspective. If you pursue financing other than what's represented in this purchase contract and you fail to obtain that financing, and you try to cancel based on the loan contingency, you're breaching contract and you're subject to losing your earnest money deposit. So it's make sure you're pursuing the financing that's on the contract. The appraisal contingency is very simple. The value comes in or it doesn't come in. If the value comes in lower than purchase price, you can cancel or you can renegotiate the purchase price. So what else is contained in an appraisal? The square footage. So if the square footage isn't what the property is purported to be, it's less, can you cancel based upon the appraisal contingency? The answer is no. You can cancel based upon the investigation contingency. The appraisal is simply just a matter of value, nothing more than that. And the body of the contract stipulates that. And if you notice to the right, removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in FVAC. That the FVAC is the mandatory clause. So we talked about that. Even if someone's getting a FHA or VA loan and they have removed their appraisal contingency and the purchase price doesn't equal or exceed the dollar amount on the mandatory clause, the buyer can still cancel. And then an investigation of property, well, it's all property inspections, physical inspections, so on and so forth. The default is 17 days, but obviously you can move that around. Informational access, it is not a contingency. It's just saying to the buyer, you have 17 days after acceptance to access the property. And sometimes sellers have said no more because the inspections go on and on and on, and they don't want to allow them on the property. So it's up to the seller. Then insurance, section L4-8D. Insurance is a contingency. It's not only obtaining insurance, but the cost of insurance is also part of that contingency. If it's too expensive for you, you can cancel based upon the insurance contingency. Now, I would never suggest just canceling based upon one aspect. We certainly would like to find other reasons for cancellation of a contract, but the cost of insurance is a contingency.
Question about that. It isn't, so when you say the cost of insurance, isn't that somewhat ambiguous? Like, you
Yes,
just
it
say.
is.
Right, there's no number on
There's
this.
not really a number, so I'm wondering, like,
It is a-
and that's why you're saying try to find another.
Yeah,
reason to cancel,
exactly, right.
That may not hold.
Yeah.
So the seller has a right to be like, no, you can't cancel based on insurance.
Because this didn't used to exist.
Well, it's the same thing with investigations. What if like there's noise that you hear but no one else hears and you want to cancel because of the nuisance or whatever? You can still cancel because of that.
Yeah.
And it's subjective, right, to everybody.
It's subjective, like there's not enough parking on that
So- Right,
street.
so it's the same thing
HOA
with
doesn't
insurance.
know.
If it's too expensive for you, it's subjective.
Yeah, but the point is, the seller may say, you know what, you're just trying to get out of the contract, and I'm not going to agree to release your deposit.
Because you never know what kind of. seller
So that's why the recommendation is if we can find other reasons just besides this one particular reason, you know, the house is haunted.
That's some company in there.
So yes, subjective is the word. Previous versions or iterations of the contract didn't bring up cost, it just was insurability. Could you get insurance? And if you have to go to the California Fair Plan, it may be too costly. Right, if you can't get it through a traditional insurer, yeah, all insurance is so expensive right now, it's crazy.
But you technically did say like I called today, it was too expensive, it's more than I thought it was going to be, and we can cancel.
You could,
Um,
you could. I think that I probably would want to see how it affects me if I'm pursuing financing. Maybe it pushes me over the threshold regards what my debt to income ratios are, my housing expenses. The common interest disclosures, okay, those are the HOA documents. So the seller has 17 days to deliver it. Now, all these contingencies we're looking at, you have the greater of 17 days, assuming you don't change the time frame, or 5 days after receipt to remove the contingencies. And why can that be important? Because many times, if there's a property that multiple people want, you may be modifying the contingency time frame from 17 to 7 days. Well, the seller has 7 days to deliver all the seller required disclosures. So what if they deliver on day 7? That means you still have 5 more days to address these contingencies.
So Rich, why would someone cancel because of HOA docs? What are some issues that?
Well, what I'm seeing much more often now, many condominium projects are non-warrantable, meaning Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are no longer buying those underlying securities. So the interest rate is far higher because you're obtaining hard money loans. So non-warrantable condos, and why is that occurring? Underfunded reserves, and that's something you should be looking at in the HOA documents. Or insurability. They can't get insurance, witness things like that. Or if you look at something and the reserves are only funded to 20% of the replacement cost, you know that there's going to be some type of special assessment, or there's going to be an increase in the HOA dues to somehow fund that disparity. And it is your obligation to look through the HOA documents. Now, no one's going to read 100% of those documents, but you should be looking at the index to see the budget, the reserves, if there's any type of litigation, if they're getting a loan or there's litigation, that very well could prevent the lender from proceeding.
There's some HOAs that only let you park in your garage and not in the driveway.
Parking's an issue.
That could be an issue.
And then, unfortunately, the other thing that comes with the HOA, sometimes there's detached parking. And no longer will you see a title report specifying what your parking spot is, because there's been so much litigation, because people sometimes swap those remote parking spots or rent them out. So now you've got somebody else who's dwelling or using your parking spot. How do you know which parking spot is associated with your unit, you need to get the condo plan. And the condo plan is going to specify which parking structure is associated with your unit.
So no matter what people do, we can always go back to the condo plan, right? What, like,
Yes.
regarding parking,
Yes. There's no title will no longer ensure
right?
that remote parking spot. So at one point, we used to be able to get them to specify that. So in the event there's a claim, they had to pay for it, but they won't do it anymore.
Don't blame them.
Not anymore. Yeah. So keep that in mind. And then, the other thing from common interest disclosures, the minutes. Make sure you review the minutes. That's probably one of the most informing documents that you can receive. And the minutes just simply recounting what the meetings consist of. Now, some HOAs have monthly meetings, some have them quarterly or every 2 months. So there's no particular time frame. But what you will see are discussions about possible special assessments, increasing dues. Those are all things that are very, very important.
So if the dues were going to be increased for the following year, again, that is a way we can get out if you had to.
You could. I wouldn't be satisfied with that, right? But they're always going up, just
They're
how
always
much?
going up,
Yeah.
Not a lot.
Yeah, yeah, insurance has gone up dramatically. Yeah, the replacement costs to maintain the buildings, the roads, so on and so forth, it's just crazy. And then section L8, review of leased or lien items, and this mainly refers to solar systems. And this is always a big issue, and it is a contingency of the contract. The default aspect of the contract is that the buyer has no obligation to assume any type of encumbrance associated with a solar system. And solar systems are installed in one of two ways, or they're financed in one of two ways: a lease or a purchase. And if it's a purchase, the lender is not even going to allow the buyer to assume the loan. If they're going to require the seller to pay it off. So surprise, surprise, right? Sellers think, oh, just transfer that, and the buyer is going to assume the loan.
So I have a question, because like my escrow right now, we're dealing with this one.
We
And-
talked about that briefly.
Yeah, so the lender just called me right now
Uh-huh.
and said, I read it on the title report. So on the title
There's two
report,
UCC filings, right?
and so I said, I already pointed it out. I reached out to escrow about it for clarity. I reached out to title for clarity, you know. I'm trying to find clarity right now. Nobody has the information from the solar company yet. I
Mhm.
guess they haven't received it back, but they haven't received the contracts.
Yeah.
Specifically. But even if we find out it must be assumable. We
Or
have
it
to-
can be
It
assumable.
can be assumable, but my buyer doesn't want to assume it, then we have to cancel before whatever I wrote down here as the contingency. But I wrote for, I forwarded.
No, you don't have to cancel. Remember, the only thing they can do, first of all, for you to remove a contingency, they have to give you all the underlying documents.
So if he blows through 14 days, doesn't give me the documents, I'm still okay.
Yes,
For 5 more days after he gives me the documents.
yes.
Or
Correct.
until you remove the contingency.
Right.
If you
The
choose
person
to.
that asked me to remove it, he's not gonna do a notice to perform unless he's giving me these documents, right?
Yeah, in her transaction, there's 2 UCC filings, and so it suggests to me that it's not a purchase.
Yeah.
That they're leased, or the equipment is leased, so matter of fact, so it's probably assumable. Now, it doesn't mean that your client wants to assume it. Not only that, the body, the contract indicates that the seller has no obligation to make any contributions to paying off those encumbrances, by the way.
But in that case, the seller can pay it off. though.
Can.
He can if he chooses
Yeah.
to do so, right?
Yes. Now, we had another one just came up recently, a house that's worth $400,000 for, yeah.
285, 300,000.
And the solar system over 25 years, it's $172,000 on a property that's worth $400,000.
That's crazy.
Is that an assumable or pay off or what is that?
It's a purchase.
It was a purchase?
Yeah.
Versus the 25
No, I'm sorry, it's a lease. It's a lease. This was a lease. Yeah, but what the buyer is not going to assume this remaining encumbrance of about, because it's only been on the property for a year. Of about
Rich.
$165,000.
So the buyer's not gonna assume that.
Right, that means this transaction is going to fail. And other than that, the only option the seller has is to pay the whole thing off.
Who buys solar for that expensive? It's crazy.
You know, that's people don't read. It's crazy. It's that crappy house out in Palm Desert somewhere, Desert Hot Springs.
So bad.
Yeah. It's unconscionable, actually.
It's really-
I couldn't believe when I read the contract. I thought, oh, maybe there's a way out. Yeah, pay it off.
Hi, Richard. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
About the condo plan, does it come with the CCNRs or it has to be requested separately?
It does not come with the CCNR, so you have to contact the HOA for the condo plan.
Okay. The other question I have is just a reminder about HELOCs. Do they have to be paid off before the close or
Yes, they'll be paid off concurrent with the close. As a matter of fact,
okay.
what will happen if a seller has a home equity line of credit, there's going to be a demand sent out from escrow to figure out how much is owing. At the time that demand goes out, the lender that provided the home equity line, they're going to freeze that equity line.
Mhm.
So yes, unless for
Mhm.
some reason the buyer agrees to assume it, and that's not going to happen.
I see.
I
Okay.
think under a rule.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So anyways, yeah, solar panels, it's always a problem, and it's a problem for escrow because they're trying to get these companies to respond, and it's just never a quick turnaround.
That was another question that I had. Escrow's supposed to call and call these solar companies.
Yeah.
And request the payout amount or.
We send a written demand, actually, once we have authorization from the seller, then we send a written demand. So
Asking
that,
for a copy of the contract or the payout. amount,
yes,
Basically,
the
or
payout.
assumability, whatever they're asking, but it takes them a long time to get it back.
Yeah, because these finance companies don't care.
They don't care. So this could be something that could delay escrow.
Yes, they can. It hasn't, it's usually, it takes time. It's rare that we see it held up, but it just, we had one recently and it was a purchase. And the person had spent $40,000 or $45,000. And the first year there were no payments. They thought
What?
oh yeah, that's the way they got to buy the system. First year, no payments. It was purchased, so the seller was unpleasantly surprised and it was a purchase and they had to pay it off. It wasn't escrow. They thought that the buyer could assume it. So there was no free ride there. And so they had paid $45,000 for a solar system they used for 1 year. And it was an elderly couple. I think that people were just taking advantage of it.
It's so unfair.
Yeah, it is. And then L9, sale of buyer's property. If the buyer has to sell their property, they would check this box and attach form CRP, making their offer contingent upon the seller home. We see some going forward like that, not too often. And then time of possession. When do I move in? Notice of recordation. So that's the default. So at the time the loan records or the transaction records, then I'm entitled to keys to the property and to access to the property. And then M2, seller occupied or vacant units, close of escrow date or check below. If for some reason the seller is going to remain as a tenant after the close of escrow, then we would use something called Form SIP, seller in possession form. It's just a one-page form of a lease agreement that's abbreviated. If they're going to remain in there for 30 days or more, we would use Form RLAS, which is residential lease after sale. And the RLAS completely resembles the residential month-to-month lease. So, but we don't want, I don't care if it's 3 days, that a seller is going to remain in the property. We need to have some kind of documentation. And then the other thing, I think you and I just talked about this, Gina, right? if there is going to be a lease back to a seller, we're going to want to do two things. I'm going to want to do my final walkthrough, approximately 5 days before. But then, because that seller is going to become a tenant of mine, I'm going to want to do my move-in inspection so I can identify any and all deficiencies, if there are any in the property. Because at the time they move out, maybe they've caused damage to the property. So 2 forms of inspection that I request or suggest. Treat them as a tenant.
Should the seller do that themselves or would the buyer's agent, I'm sorry,
The buyer.
agent do it themselves or the buyer?
The buyer.
The buyer.
And we should recommend that to the buyer, exactly. They do the inspection and have the seller who's going to be the tenant sign it. Now, if you look at the MII form, it's move-in inspection, something or other. The default is that everything is in perfect order. So if they just sign it in blank, then everything's perfect. But remember, with leases now, you're required to take pictures of the condition of the property at the time the lease commences, pictures at the time it expires, and then pictures after completing any repairs. So, who said real estate was simple? And then occupy units by tenants or anyone other than the seller, subject to tenants' rights unless primary or secondary residents are otherwise agreed. So if there is a tenant in the property and the seller, you're not aware of it, let's assume you're representing the buyer. Well, the contract states that the seller should be returning the contract with a change, losing my words here, counteroffer, and attaching to that form TOPA. Now, why is that form TOPA critical? Is that previously, if a seller was selling a property and he promised the buyer that the tenant was going to move out by the close of escrow and didn't, the seller could be sued. Because they never delivered the property for any clear the tenants. However, the form TOPA addresses that and says that the tenant doesn't move out. The only thing the seller is obligated to in terms of any type of remediation would be the cost to refund to the buyer, cost of their inspection and appraisal. So it limits the exposure that a seller has in the event they can't deliver the property they can. So if you know that the seller has a tenant occupying the property, just attach the form TOPA so you dictate the terms of it. And then section N, seller delivery of documents. Seller has 7 days to deliver all seller disclosures. If they don't, what can a buyer do? Well, the buyer can send a notice to perform and then 2 days thereafter, cancel the transaction. However, if the seller doesn't deliver all necessary documents, they cannot make the buyer remove their contingencies. So the contingency period just lives on. And then, to sign or return escrow holder provisions and instructions, they have 5 days to do that. And then, and 3, time to pay fees for ordering HOA docs. Well, typically, if escrow will order HOA docs the same day or next day, and someone has to pay for them. And then, and 4, install smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater bracing, 7 days after acceptance. And why is that important? Because in the event a buyer is getting an appraisal and the appraiser notices that these things are not in compliance, they probably have to do re-inspection, there are additional costs. And the contract indicates that the seller has the obligation to reimburse the buyer for those additional costs. And then, in 5, evidence of representative authority, 3 days after acceptance. I'm an entity, I'm an LLC or an S corp when I submitted the purchase contract. I signed it in my capacity as officer of that entity, but how do you, Mr. Seller, know that I actually have authority to act on behalf of the entity? So within 3 days after acceptance, I, as the buyer, provide the seller with some supporting documentation, the operating agreement, if I'm an LLC, or maybe if it's a trust that's buying, a certification of trust or the trust documents that show that I've been granted authority to act on behalf of that entity. We're getting closer. And then items included and excluded, if for some reason you think any of these items listed here, there's concern about it being included in the property, because the body of the contract does specify items that are considered to be fixtures. If you want something, add it or check it, just be sure. And if you want something removed, check excluded items. So we've had people remove, even though it's a fixture, expensive chandeliers, and they put a piece of shit light up in its place. It's amazing what people do. They remove window treatments, even they're not supposed to, including curtains, and it's specified clearly in the contract. So anything you can do to prevent disputes.
So in the listing, the MLS listing, they says that exclude item is washer and dryer. And in this document, the buyer agent, and you can put that information here.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because even if the MLS states that the washer and dryer is included, and you don't put it in the contract, it is not included.
No, it's not.
I understand. I'm just going the opposite way. If it's not included, then there's nothing for you to do. They're going to move out. That's her obligation. But what happens more often, they say it's included on the MLS, then the contract doesn't stipulate that. And if it's not in the contract, it's not included. Then Q1, the National Hazard Zone disclosure commonly, and this is nothing prescribed by law, but these are just customs as to what we believe is customary for the seller or buyer to pay. So the NHD report is customarily the seller paying for that, check the box environmental, and you can choose any provider. And then optional wildlife disclosure report, I typically would leave that blank. Now Q3, I write pest control in, some people write in termite report. Pest control is defined within the body of the contract as termite inspection. So that's why I choose pest control. I rather conform to the body of the contract. And it's common that the seller pay for that. And then Q4, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, water heater bracing. It is customary that the seller pay for that. So check the box, seller, nobody's going to object to that. Q5, government required point of sale inspections. That means just that, an inspection. It doesn't mean remediation of any deficiencies that are found. So the only issue we have in Orange County are water conservation and plumbing fixtures. So, and it's not a point of sale requirement. So a lot of times you can leave this blank, and same thing with Q6. However, in LA County, they have other types of inspections that enforce it. Removal of bars, the installation of windows, and you have to have these governmental required inspections, and you must have corrective remedial action taken, as a matter of fact.
Rich, who takes care of that? The property inspector or somebody else, some other third-party vendor?
A third party that does those inspections, and it should be, we're going to assign, in this case, the cost of the seller to do that.
Got it.
In Orange County, it's still just like Newport Beach has some.
Actually, they've even stopped the inspection.
The toilet.
That's my understanding. They used to have an inspection that was required, or you could just pay a fee to avoid the inspection fee. Yes, yes. And then escrow fees, I suggest checking the box each to the right, each pay their own, because if your client gets a discount, that doesn't have to be extended to the other party. But if we say both, then each party is going to participate in the discount. And of course, always specifies sterling escrow. Owner's title policy, what's customary is that the seller pay, and you'll see lawyer's title is recommended. Buyer's lender's title policy, the contract defaults to the buyer paying for it. So in addition to the seller's policy, if the buyer is getting a loan, the lender will require a buyer's lender title insurance policy. And then county transfer tax and fees, it's customary the seller pay for it, and that is $1.10 per thousand in Orange County. LA County, it's as high as $4.40 per thousand. Huge. Be careful about that. City transfer tax or fees. There are none in Orange County that I'm aware of, but if you're not sure, check the box, say seller, for example, and type in if applicable. And if you just check the box, sometimes agents get very snotty and say, there's no city tax, but at least you're putting them on notice that you recognize it may not be applicable. HOA fees for preparing disclosures. Seller, and why? Because Civil Code 4525 and 4530 mandates that the seller pay for those HOA documents. HOA certification fee. Now you can see the buyer's defaulting. The only time, not the only time, but customarily when an HOA cert is ordered, it's because the buyer's lender is requesting it. Unfortunately, many lenders don't make that decision early on in a transaction. So then later on, they order it or they contact escrow asking them to order it now or late in the game. And that's going to indicate if there's any litigation and or deficiencies associated with that buyer's account. HOA transfer fees, it's customary the seller pay. Private transfer fees, you can see the default is seller pays. The only area in Orange County that has private transfer fees is Ladera Ranch. And then Q16 and Q17, if there's something else you want to add. Q18, the home warranty, it's customary that the seller pay for the home warranty. And you can put in whatever dollar amount you want, but you should probably look it up and you can choose who the provider is. Or the buyer can waive the home warranty plan, you check that box. And then a lot of these things we've talked about already, but there's a couple things I just want to touch upon. Section 11, statutory and other disclosures. So the transfer disclosure statement is statutory required, meaning it's required by law. NHD also, that's required by law. Or that statutory to name anything. However, this is important because the seller, whether if there's no exemption, it's rare there are exemptions, they must deliver a transfer disclosure statement to the buyer. And that transfer disclosure statement is considered complete if all questions are answered and if the agent representing the seller has completed their inspection. So if they've written the results of their inspection on page 3 of the TDS, that satisfies the statute. If they check a box for the AVID, which is Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure, unless they deliver the Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure with the TDS, the delivery is not complete. Is the TDS upon delivery opens up a rescission period. If I deliver to you in person, 3 days right of rescission. If I send it to you electronically, it's a 5-day right of rescission. So it's very important we get those disclosures out as quickly as possible.
I have a question.
I'm just wondering why it would be different days depending on in person versus emailing.
That's legislature.
Okay.
It's the only explanation I have. And if a TDS is required, the seller property questionnaire is required. If the TDS is not required, there's an exemption. Then an exempt seller disclosure is required. And the seller property questionnaire, we're not going over those today, or the exempt seller disclosure are critical because they are seller disclosures and they could theoretically, if I deliver those after they remove contingencies, it very well could open up my ability as a buyer to cancel. So we want to make sure all those disclosures are provided. Disclosures that you must provide under law, lead disclosures, if it's a pre-1978 building. The home fire hardening disclosure report, if the house was built before January 1st, 2010, and it's in a high fire zone. I'm on section. Let's see what page is this. Page 12. And then defensible space disclosure and addendum, section D. That's required if the TDS is required and the house is in a high or very high fire hazard zone. And how do you know if it's in a high fire hazard zone? You look at the NHD report. Or there's a viewer, you can actually type in the address and figure it out that way, but I would rely on the NHD report. And let's see. Termination rights, we talked about that. Withholding taxes. Remember, the seller has an obligation to deliver to the buyer their social security numbers, or via escrow, which acts as a qualified substitute, information associated with their social security numbers. Because in the event the seller is a non-resident alien, they are subject to withholding. If federal withholding, it's 10% if the purchase price is $1 million or less. If it's more than $1 million, 15%. And then for the franchise tax board, it's 3.3%. And we're talking about the gross selling price. We talked about condominium plan disclosures. There's investigation of property. The preliminary title report, you will get a preliminary title report. It's going to show the condition of title. If it's amended, you have 5 more days upon receipt to cancel. And then time periods, removal of contingencies. So the default for most of the contract was 17 days for contingency periods. Let's assume Gina brought this up before. We're at day 18 and we haven't removed our contingencies. Well, what can the seller do? The seller just can't cancel. Before canceling, the seller must deliver a notice for form. And then 2 days, the date of delivery is day 0. And then on the 3rd day following the date of delivery, only then could the seller cancel if the buyer does not remove that contingency. And then let's see. Just only go over a couple of definitions and we'll wrap it up there. I think they tired of me talking.
No,
No, that's not true.
no.
Okay.
All right. Acceptance, 25A. They talked about this. It's not the date of the last signature, it's the date in which that document is delivered after the date of the last signature. That is deemed to be contract acceptance. Agent, we know who that is. Agreement, purchase contract, and all addenda. As is, the property is being sold as is. That doesn't mean that you're not required to disclose any deficiencies that you're aware of as a seller. Car form, that's self-explanatory. Close of escrow, I think that's self-explanatory. Counting days. But remember, once the contract is signed and delivered and the recipient receives it, so I submitted an offer to Carlos, he's a seller, he delivers it back to me today. Today is day 0. Tomorrow's day 1. So that's how we count days.
Remind me, we don't put contingencies on the weekend.
Good point. So let's assume we receive a notice to perform on Thursday. So we have 2 more days to remove our contingencies. If the execution of the event falls on a weekend or legal holiday, it then falls to the following business day at 11:59 p.m. Likewise, if the close of escrow falls on a weekend or legal holiday, it falls to the following business day. The difference is going to be if I'm negotiating a purchase contract and there's an expiration date on the purchase contract. If it expires on a Saturday, it expires. It doesn't move on to the next business day. But that's before contract acceptance. And then mediation. Contractually, if there's a dispute, parties are required to mediate. There's exceptions such as small claims court. If there is a dispute and one party demands mediation and the other party refuses, it can still go to arbitration or litigation. However, if you refuse to mediate and you prevail, you're not entitled to collect attorney's fees and costs. So that's the reason to agree to mediate, and mediation is non-binding. Likewise, the liquidated damages clause, section 29. If the liquidated damages clause and together with the arbitration clause, they act independently. But if there's 4 people to a transaction, 2 sellers and 2 buyers, if all parties to the transaction don't initial these clauses fully, the contract is not complete. So you must issue a counteroffer to state whether liquidated damages and or arbitration of disputes will be included or excluded. Then we have the signature pages, and then I think that's pretty much for me. That we'll talk about today.
Thank you, Richard.
Sure. That's a question, sure.
Yeah, just real quick, can I assume that once we have this document from the buyer that let's say I'm the seller or I'm the buyer, we've talked, the agent talk to each other, or we're both incentivized to make this happen? How rigid is this? And how combative is this document? Or are they just trying to get this to close as possible, or is there gonna be a lot of back and forth here, generally speaking?
I guess it all depends upon the seller and the agent, right? So, yeah, and one thing that happens all the time, people say nasty things about the other party. Don't pass any of that on. Just keep it to yourself.
Okay.
So that was one thing that I would always suggest, right? Let's not elevate the amount of anger that people have.
Okay, and that will happen.
It can, yes, yes, it will happen. And then, people have said, I have to close by the contract date. It's a contract,
Okay.
so.
Right.
So yes, people get very angry when we don't close on time. Very angry.
Mhm.
We don't know what their circumstances are. So, maintain the composure of your clients. Don't draw a line in the sand. Keep them moving forward. That's always the goal here.
Sometimes
Yeah.
issues might be the request for repairs where the buyers want them to do cosmetic work instead of actual repairs. And they're not realistic as to what they should be asking for.
Okay.
And so that could be something.
Yeah, so you need to help moderate or create reasonable expectations for them. So they don't think that they're going to be getting everything they want.
That can piss off the seller sometimes.
Yeah. And that's amazing. And sometimes the other agent's just a complete asshole. For no reason at all.
Sure, that can
Gina always says to this.
I just think you can probably catch, more bees of honey. So it's like your personal style of negotiation, but be aware of the other party. There's dissonance in real estate.
Right.
So like they're advocating for their seller, you're advocating for a buyer, let's say, and so sometimes there's dissonance in that negotiation. That should be expected in advance. So that's all. But everybody wants the same goal, like what you're saying.
Right.
Like I understand your point. You're saying like everybody wants to get to the end of close of escrow once you're in escrow.
Right.
But things just come up.
Yeah, because I've done sales in like just a business, right? And so I just feel like here, I'm just wondering how much of these are actual potholes versus how much of it is kind of both, maybe we all just kind of want to get to the finish line.
No, the emotional part of
Right,
it is that this is such a huge dollar.
Right.
That's where I've done sales too in a lot of different capacities, and I will say this seems to be
Far more.
emotional,
Right,
or the
right.
most emotional transaction or negotiation I've ever been involved with, because it's people's life savings. It's because sellers need the money to do something else, and everybody says they're being fair and equitable.
Right.
I'm not sure if it always is, but yeah,
Right. Okay.
it's the emotion.
Yeah, and then they say, I'm not gonna go for it. I'm not gonna do this. But don't put them in the position that they have to even say things.
Even after this doc is submitted, they're like,
Oh, certainly.
okay, all right.
Yeah, like it's one of the things that Jay Jung always says, that you want both sides to feel like they're getting something out of it, right? They both feel good about it.
Okay.
So you don't want to fight the other person for petty things. You might sometimes just want to talk to your client and say, look, this is not worth canceling over, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
They get like.
Hey, Rich, quick question.
Yes.
On the RPA, well, kind of after the RPA, but on Glendora, I'm getting an offer. The listing is in a trust. The agent's pushing with a cash offer. It's a really good offer. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that the trustees wanted it to go through the trust lawyer. So we have now it's in the hands of the trust lawyer. can I counter and say subject to trust attorney's approval? Is that something you would suggest?
Absolutely,
Okay, good,
Yes.
good. I'll just put that exact verbiage in. Thank you.
yes. Good one. That was a good thought.
Thank you.
You can create your own, yeah, you can create your own contingencies.
You haven't accepted yet, right?
No,
No.
we have not accepted.
Okay.
Counter to their offer.
Because sometimes people want to do this after they've already accepted.
Yeah, you can't
Oh
do that.
yeah. Oh, that would be bad. No.
Yeah, you might just submit it to the attorney and just let the other party know it's subject to approval.
Awesome.
Or,
Thanks.
you know, you could actually, in the future, if you have to put in the public, the private remarks.
Is that the case with all trust listings?
No.
That okay.
Yeah, I think this is an unusual. Isn't this associated with the decedent's estate?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the difference, right? And so there's probably a number of people who are going to be getting money out of the sale of this transaction. So they don't want to be cheated. They want someone else to look over their shoulder.
Yep. Yep. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
you.
One more question.
Of course.
All right. Thank you.
You know when you're hired, they want first at the very beginning, is it no different than? I just want to help you with.
Well, you're going to have to provide one or two things, the trust documents themselves or certification of trust.
You don't have to submit that with the RFP.
No, 3 days after.